Thomas Green here with the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. On the episode today, we have EksAyn Anderson. EksAyn, welcome.
Thank you, Thomas. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
It is very much my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I do a lot of presenting, and I do some sales and presenting, but my main role is the role of being a family guy, of being a parent, um, husband and parent. So we could go into depth in that, but really, I feel like my main role is to be a dad.
Okay. And why do you feel that way?
Well, the thing is, if you think about the amount of influence that you'll have long term in life. So if you and I, Thomas, let's just say we were to build some great business. They did a study by McKinsey that showed that most businesses last shorter than they are. So in fact, 71% shorter than they were several decades ago. So right now, even a great business, most businesses don't make it past a year or two or three, but even established businesses have a problem making it past year 18. So we could have this amazing business. We could spend all of our time trying to build it, but statistically, in a decade or two, our business might be bought, sold, bankrupted, disrupted. But the kind of parent that we are can go on for a long, long, long time. Now, let me give you just one example. I live in the United States. Well, why do I live here? Well, because my ancestors, hundreds of years ago, more than one of them, decided to come to the United States. Well, that choice is still profoundly affecting me. It affects the language I speak, it affects my educational opportunities or economic opportunities. And so because they made this choice hundreds of years ago, I'm now still affected. Well, that's pretty obvious because it's geographic. But just as obvious, I mean, were they keyed in? Were they kind and loving? Were they drunk or angry? Those kinds of things can also be passed down for many, many, many years. And so when we see, Stephen Covey made this comment. He said, some people climb the ladder to success and they get to the top, and then they realize sometimes too late that their ladder was on the wrong wall. And so I think that the biggest influence that you and I can have, Thomas, is to be a checked-in family member, checked-in dad, and so you're doing a great work here. Thanks for the great question.
It's a great answer. I love it. And it's a definitional one for me, which is the follow-up, which is you mentioned the phrase checked in. The opposite, presumably, is checked out. So to you, what's the definition of both a checked in parent and one who's checked out?
And that's a super good question. So in my view, the most successful parents are the ones who act as if they are the CEOs of their children's education. And what I mean by that is, sometimes people just kind of go with the flow and do what everyone else is doing. But the truth is, if you really truly act like you're the CEO of your children's education, to me, that means you can figure out what the best thing is for them. So, you may decide to, and I realize this is different in different areas, but you may decide to send them to a public school. You may decide maybe that doesn't work and you have to send them to a different kind of school. Or some people like to homeschool. Some people send them to a private school. Some people want to hire a tutor. Some people want to teach them a musical instrument like piano, or hire a karate teacher, or teach them swim lessons, or whatever it is that you feel that your children need. With the parents who step up and say, you know what, the buck stops with me. I'm not going to. And by the way, as a CEO, you can still outsource. You can still say, hey, I'm going to, there's somebody who's better at this than me. So I'm going to let the teacher or the school or wherever I feel good about. But it's not just coasting and, your kids come home and you're on your device and you don't talk much. It's saying, I'm going to consciously raise children who, and be checked in. I'm going to be the CEO of my children's education is the way I like to think about it. And I think parents who do that have much better outcomes than parents who just kind of coast and just go with the flow of whatever else is happening around them. Great question.
Yeah, I love the answer. I'm interested to know, because you mentioned a lot of the things that I'm currently doing, so I'm happy with that. They're in jujitsu, they do piano, and I've hired a tutor at a relatively early age, because I think the tutor would probably do a better job than I could, even though a tutor's not necessarily mandatory if you can do it, right? So, but is there anything in addition that you think you would encourage, or is a best practice for you that you'd encourage others to do?
You are a great host. I got to tell you this, Thomas. You asked such great questions, and thank you. You're doing a great. These are wonderful
Appreciate that.
questions. Let me tell you some of the things that we've chosen to do, and these aren't necessarily what everyone needs to do. So, uh, last last year, um, we decided that we wanted our children to learn and see a good part of the United States. We live in the Western United States, and we decided that we were going to take several weeks. We took almost 6 weeks, and we traveled down through the southern United States, which allowed us to visit places like the NASA Space Center. My children like rockets and spaceships, so we went and saw some things in Texas. We went down and we drove over to Florida. We went over, saw some of the Civil War sites in the southern states. Went up to the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and we saw some of the things, and we discussed history and had a great time. Now, to do that, I actually pulled my kids out of school for 6 weeks, and I think they learned more in that 6 weeks than they would have if I had left them in school. Now, I'm not anti-school. I think there's some great things at school, but for us and our family, I decided that I think it would be better for us to make some good memories together. And we had a little pop-up tent trailer, and we popped it up in campgrounds, and we had a good time. It was educational, it was fun, and we discussed a lot of different things from science to history to just having a good time together. And for us, that's what we felt to do. Now, I trust that the dads who are listening to this um, will know at some level what their children need. I don't know what their children need, but you, the listener, the dad who's listening to this podcast, has a good idea if you're thoughtful and mindful and think, what is it that my kids could use best? And if you kind of follow those I can call them promptings. If you follow those thoughts that if you're calm and still, you can say, hey, I think my kids could use this. I like how you said you've got them in. Did you say jujitsu? Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
So one of the jobs of a good dad, I think, is to protect your kids and also teach them to protect themselves. So here you are teaching your kids to do jujitsu. That's awesome. To give them opportunities to learn the piano. It's said, there's so much correlation between somebody who can play an instrument and intelligence. And so being able to develop their brain in a way where they have to learn the chords and the octaves and all the things that you have to learn in piano are great opportunity. So my hat's off to you in that way. And for us, we've done the same thing. We all of my children learn piano. We actually put them in a dual immersion school. So here's the interesting thing: my kids can all speak Chinese. We've never been to China, but they can. So we'll be at the dinner table, and my wife and I do not speak Chinese, but my kids can speak Chinese because we thought, Chinese is going to be a good school, a good thing for them to learn. And so, be the CEO, and that's the main thing: is look for the opportunities, and the piano, the jujitsu, love it. For us, we wanted to take a family trip, and and our kids also can speak Chinese, which is kind of a unique thing, living in the Western United States. And so sometimes we'll meet people who are from China, and they're completely wowed that our children can chit chat with them. We can't, but our children can. It's kind of interesting.
That's a great answer. I love the additional language. I didn't think of that one yet, but I totally value say the opportunities and the I think it's good for the brain, right, to pick up a second language. For whatever reason, your answer also highlighted something for me, which I think you'd probably be able to shed some light on, which is whenever I think of travel, like most of the time, I am quite happy with my little ones, no problems. But I know that there are some patience related issues around travel. Sometimes it's difficult. You can lose your, not temper, but it can just be a little bit difficult sometimes. Have you got any thoughts about dealing with, increased patience so that you don't, so that you're not unkind because you've lost your temper, essentially?
Yeah, great question. Well, and this is a complex question. one of the things that's interesting that, so when we travel, one of the things we've tried to do is not use devices as much. Now, that doesn't mean we wouldn't maybe pull out a laptop while we're sitting there and watch something, but a lot of times I think parents, so this is a multifaceted question. Sometimes parents will just give their kid a device trying to make them be quiet. But the truth is, in the car, when you're driving, so we literally drove across the country. We put thousands and thousands. I mean, I think we put close to, I want to say around 6,000 or 7,000 miles on our car. But that would give us a lot of time to be in the car together. Now, in some ways, people say, well, that's just too long to drive. But you would be surprised at some of the good conversations we had as we just drove, because we're all in this little place trying to drive and go from there. I think really trying to do the little things that take care of yourself. Could you ever get impatient? Sure. I mean, I've found myself getting impatient sometimes, and I'm not there. But one of the things I think is best is try to take good care of yourself. In other words, get a good amount of sleep, so it's easier to be patient, right? And I would probably advise against devices. I've seen a lot of I've heard of a lot of situations where people give devices and the kids almost become, this is a strong word, but almost like addicted to, they have to have the iPad, or they have to have the phone, or they have to have something. And there's so many beautiful conversations that can happen when that's not happening. And I think that adds, frankly, to the overall feel of the family. When people, if you're going to go on vacation, have a chat with your children and say, hey, look, we're not going to be on devices a lot, because we're here to spend time with each other and get to know each other, and get to, when I say get to know, spend good quality time together. So I don't know if I have any great advice other than take care of yourself so it's easier. Right.
I
And
like the answer. And
mhm.
you've highlighted something which is really important to ask you about. I'm sure you've been asked it by other parents before, but the topic of screens and use of social media and internet, and how parents can cope in that particular area, is I don't know, it's a tricky one at the moment. I kind of feel like human beings are figuring this out as we go, rather than having some solution to that problem. So is there anything that you do, or that you would advise others to do in that area, like a best practice that you'd share?
Such a great question. There has been a lot of research, and in fact, I wish I had the stat available here, but there was one time where somebody actually, they had the students in the class add up how many times they were notified during a certain class in school. And it was this huge astronomical, hundreds of times that people were being distracted. And they found that, and there's a lot of schools who are doing this now, who are actually saying, we have a zero, like you can put your phone in a bag, and it basically, I mean, they're basically in a gentle but nice way saying it's not allowed to happen in school, and the outcomes are much better. The phones are very distracting, very distracting. And I heard somebody say that when you give your child a phone, it's almost, that's the time when their childhood ends. I'm not sure if that's true, but there was a little bit of, it seems like there's a little truth for that. As a dad, our jobs, in my view, are to protect our children. Now, that doesn't mean we say you got to live in a bubble and you can't experience real life. That's not what I'm saying. But for us to say, hey, here's a phone and you can access anything for good or evil on this phone anytime you want, to me, that's irresponsible. And so I think waiting until they're a mature age, which for my children, I'm going to wait till they're probably at least 16. For some people, that's way too old. We still have a lot of time. And even then, I'm probably going to say, it's okay to put some parental controls and see what's going on with the phone. There's a number of ways you can do that. There's companies like right now, if my children do have, in fact, I got to say that I have children that are under 16, and we have this little phone. It's called a light phone. So that if they really needed to call me or text me, they could, but there's no internet access. There's no apps. It's just, if I needed to send them somewhere and they needed, to call me. There's another phone called a Gab phone that some people like. I haven't tried that. There's a number of different ways you can say, okay, I can still communicate with my children, but I don't need to give them access to every, I'm not going to do that. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's the right of a dad to say, hey, this is a very powerful thing. I mean, you don't give a 6-year-old kid a car and say, go drive. I mean, you wait till they're mature enough to handle the car, to know that they can do it, and cell phones are powerful. I'm not anti-technology. I mean, I use cell phones and computers all day for work, but I want my kids to learn it responsibly. And so I'm taking it at a measured level. And I think we as dads have a right to say, hey, we're not just going to give it to you just because all your friends have one. That's okay. We may be a little different, but that's how it's going to be.
The great answer. I agree with absolutely everything you said. And the reason why I laughed when you said light phone was because I was about to recommend it in my
Oh,
answer.
yeah, they're great. I mean,
So,
they have zero. You can text and you can call, and that's about it, right? So,
well, the only additional thing I was going to follow up on was, even adults don't have the whole phone addiction down, right? There are adults
oh yeah,
who have got anxiety issues due to their phone. So even when you grow up, like still not really that good for you to spend a load of time on technology, and kids can't really regulate themselves in that way.
that's a great point, Thomas.
There is one on your profile which I've been waiting to ask because it's a great question, and it is: how do you raise strong, confident children?
This is such a good question. Well, let me tell you this. Our kids want to be confident deep down innately, but sometimes as parents, I think we quash it. Let me tell you one story about my daughter when she was 5 years old. She came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I want to hike this mountain." But now, by the way, there's a mountain that we live about 30 minutes from that's 11,700 feet tall. It's a big mountain. People fly from all over the United States to hike this mountain. And she knows that I've hiked it a little bit. And she said, I want to hike this mountain. Well, she's 5 years old. And I could have easily said, well, you're too young. Let's visit again when you're older. But what I said to her instead, and by the way, I haven't always handled things great like this, but this is a story where I think I might have got it right. I said to her, well, it's going to be about a 15-mile hike, and we're going to have to go up thousands and thousands of feet, and it's going to take us all day. We're going to have to start in the early morning and go there. Are you sure you want to try it? And she goes, Dad, I want to try it. I want to try it. I want to try it. And I said, well, what are you going to do when your feet hurt? Because your feet are probably going to hurt. This is a long hike. She said, well, I'm going to take a rest and I'm going to keep hiking. And I decided to take her on a few smaller hikes a little bit. And I kept talking to her about it, kind of to just prep and say, okay, if you really want to do this, I'll do it. But I'm just going to let you know, it's going to be a long hike and we're going to have to hike all day. And she said, Dad, I'm ready. I can do it. I can do it. Well, here's the thing. I didn't know if we'd make it to the top. I realized there was a chance that we might not make it. But I did decide. We got up early. We had a backpack. We had our water and our stuff. And we were hiking this mountain. And I got to tell you, Thomas, she got to the top. My little 5-year-old girl got to the top of this 11,700-foot mountain. And I can tell you, towards the top, there were people who were hiking and they were giving her high fives and saying, wow, what a trooper. And when she got to the top of we're hiking, we get to the top of the mountain. And on the peak, there's a number of people who are just, sitting on the peak of this mountain. And they just stood up and gave her a standing ovation. Well, that was all fine and nice. But the nice thing was when we got back down, I could tell that she was confident. She was saying, I hiked this mountain. She was like, I hiked this mountain. And I could tell that it had given her experience, and she was tired and her feet did hurt. And but she also she had this sense of, I can do it. Now I could have quashed it. I could have said, you're too young. We're not going to do it. She surprised me that she could do it. And she could do it. Let me tell you one more story. My children came to me in December. Now I live in Utah where it can get cold in December. In fact, it was about 20 degrees. They came to me and they said, hey, Dad, we want to sleep out in the backyard. And I could have said, hey, it's 20 degrees out there. You're freezing to death. Well, what I said instead was, are you sure you want to sleep in this backyard? And they said, yeah, and we want to sleep in the backyard. And I said, well, at 20 degrees, if you're not prepared, you can get in some real big trouble. And we talked about how it's important not to get wet when you're outdoors in the cold, because it's like you lose heat like 20 times faster. We talked about how a lot of your heat's less through your head. And so we had this good talk about how to do it. And what happened is we had some mummy bags and some sleeping bags, and we got the hat, and we talked all about this. And I just went out and slept in the backyard in the tent with them. Okay. Now at 20 degrees. Now it was kind of a fun memory because we slept out in the backyard, but that process of them saying, hey, we want to sleep outside, even though it's cold, I could have just said, don't do it. And I would have had a good right reason. And there might be some situation where I would say, we're not doing that. and you had to use judgment. But in this situation, it gave me an opportunity to discuss with them all the things you need to do if you're going to sleep outside, and why we do it, and how to keep warm, and how not to get wet, and how to do all these things. And because of that, they came in and they told my wife, "Hey, we slept in the backyard." And anyway, it was allowing them to try things that are hard. I talked to one guy, and I just want to finish this off. I talked to one guy on another podcast, and he said sometimes he would give his children a $5 bill, or it'd be a different denomination in the UK there, but he would have them walk up as a 5-year-old, say, "I want you to go get some change for this $5 bill from that shop over there," and he'd be watching. But what he wanted him to do was let them do slightly uncomfortable things. Like, it's not really comfortable to hike a mountain for 12 hours. It's not really comfortable to go sleep outside, but he'd let them do it safely and have these experiences where it would develop their confidence. Because as a dad, what we're trying to do is let our kids grow their comfort zone. If all we're doing is staying comfortable, which is, I'm going to sit on the couch and eat potato chips, that's not helping our kids. If we're saying, okay, hey, we're going to stretch a little bit, that builds confidence in them, in my view.
Love the answer and the story. It reminds me a little bit of I think she was about 7 at the time. She wanted to do a park run. I didn't say you can't do the park run because you probably won't make it. We had a go. She did. She ran up until about 3K, and then I had to coach her through the last, couple of kilometers, encourage her to do it. And like you say, everyone was giving her high fives and supportive, and she beat some of the adults. So it was a nice moment as well.
That's
Reminds me of that.
wonderful. What a great experience with your daughter.
But your answer does sort of make me think about coaching them through difficult things, or teach them how to deal with difficult things. That's my interpretation. Is that a fair one?
Yes, I'd say, and what we're if we're only doing things that are comfortable, our comfort zone is static, maybe even shrinking. If we're doing things, so this is my comfort zone inside my hands here, and there's a lot of things that are comfortable for me to do. But if I allow things that are a little bit uncomfortable in a healthy way, right? Uncomfortable, that what happens is my comfort zone will expand as I do things that stretch me. So I like what you said with the park run. That was awesome. Trying to let them do things that are a little bit of a stretch, and coaching them allows them to develop that confidence that, hey, I've got this, I can do this. Right.
Well, I've loved your answers today. Is there anything that I should have asked you about?
Well, you're a great host, Thomas. No, I the only thing I might add to this conversation, you've asked great questions. The only thing I might add is, if parents can start with the end in mind. In other words, really, if you're 80 years old and it's your 80th birthday and people are celebrating, and you want to think about, what do you want your children to say about you, or people in the what do you want to do? If you can hold that image in your mind, like, hey, this is how I want it to end, it makes your decisions on a daily basis easier. When I say, okay, if you could really envision, these are how I want my children to talk about me at my funeral. These are how I want my children to talk about me when I'm 80 years old, if they're giving a tribute to me. And if you can hold that image, like, really take some time to imagine how you want your life to end, and how you want to be known as a dad, how you want you to have that, then my little decisions along the way become pretty clear. And, you mentioned, like, how do you keep your temper? Well, the truth is, all of us could easily get into a place where it's easy to lose our temper. And I've found myself sometimes struggling with that. But if I think about, okay, how do I want my kids when I'm 80 to remember my dad was this, or do I want them to remember that I was peaceful parenting, like your podcast suggests? That sometimes might help me in the moment make a better decision, right?
Yeah, it's a great answer. And you certainly wouldn't want to be remembered as someone who was snappy, aggressive. You want to be supportive, patient, loving, right?
The best we can, yes, absolutely.
I've loved our conversation. For people who want to get in touch with you or follow you, where do they go?
Well, what I'm doing, I've developed, there's a 7-week course that's coming out in the next 2 days. It's designed specifically for dads, touching on some of the things we've done. It's a course that I'm, and so it will be available probably in the next 48 hours on eksayn.com/dad, EKSAYN.com/dad. By the time this podcast is released, it should be there, would be my guess. Um, so
And any for dads is great. Is there anyone who particularly benefit from that?
Well, the course is specifically designed to help dads be great dads in a way that's preventative. Sometimes people get interested in parenting when everything is going wrong. In other words, so they say, my child's having this major, massive problem. Now I'm going to try to come in. This course is designed to say, let's do the little things on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a thing, so that we avoid a lot of the crises that happen later. So, if you're like some of the things we talked about here, which is be the CEO of your kid's education, to try to, how can you do things in a way that will avoid a lot of problems? And so that's kind of what the course is designed to do. And it's a 7-week course designed to get dads into habits of doing things that are uh, appropriate and will prevent a lot of problems going down the road, is my belief.
Well, thank you for doing that, and your contribution. I think that's great. And X, thanks for being a great guest today.
Thomas, thank you for having me. What an honor to be on your show. You're a great host. Really appreciate you allowing me to come on your awesome show here.